Hey everyone, this video is a guide to the panel style of medical interview. So my other interview video is about the MMI, but this is all about the panel style. So it's the one where you're just in a single room, often with 2 or 3 interviewers, and they ask you usually a range of personal questions. So this video will be a bit shorter than the other interview video. It'll just be a rundown of some of the different questions they can give you. It's not exhaustive, but I feel like certainly if you have an interview in Australia, this will cover the majority of questions you get asked. And I'll try and give some advice along the way for how I would tackle each of the different questions. Just before we start, if you want any notes or resources, or if you have any questions about UMAT, medicine, dentistry, or the interview process in Australia, then you can get in touch via that address at the top of the screen. Likewise, if you want any private tutoring, if you're in Newcastle or northern parts of Sydney, you can also get in touch there. And if you've exhausted your supply of resources and you want to buy some, you can get 30% off Prep Genie's comprehensive package via that link at the bottom using the coupon code shown there. Okay, so onto the questions, and it is just a big list of questions because the nature of this type of interviews is that it's just a long conversation, often for half an hour to an hour. So there's no different types of questions, it's all together. You'll notice probably, if you've seen my other video on the MMI interviews, a few questions which are very similar or the same, and that's because there's a lot of overlap between the two. But there should hopefully be some new ones, so just bear with me. So if we begin at the very top, the question that you'll likely be asked to kick things off is, tell us a bit about yourself. Or some variation on that, but basically just to open and to break the ice, tell us about yourself. With this question, I see it as just a chance to give 1 or 2 minutes of just a synopsis of who you are. And given that they know that you're probably pretty bright, a good student, and that you're there to study medicine or dentistry, I wouldn't mention too much about that. I wouldn't go into your motivations about studying medicine. There'll be time for that later. I would just make it a brief synopsis of you. So your background, your interests and hobbies, maybe a bit about your personality, but I think keep it brief. The other name for this type of interview, the panel interview, is semi-structured, and that's because the interviewers have a rough guide of what they want to ask, but they can deviate. If you say something interesting or you don't expand too much, they can ask follow-up questions to expand further. So don't worry about, just giving things briefly for the first question. There'll be more time later to go into hobbies and interests and motivations. So I would just say keep it brief. A bit about background, interests, hobbies, personality. That's great. And you'll see, like, the second question there is all about your hobbies and your interests. So again, they'll probably ask that to follow up at some point, and you'll have more time then to talk about what you actually do, what you get out of it, what you think it shows about you, and so forth. Looking now at the third, fourth, and fifth question there, about how family, friends, and yourself would describe yourself, I would think beforehand about maybe 3 or so different qualities which you think encapsulates you in a positive way. So whether it's patience or perceptiveness or kindness, any 3 good qualities, I would just have that in mind. And then think too about how you'll back up what you say. So have an example, doesn't need to be big, but just an example of where you've shown that. It's always good to back up what you say with just a bit of an insight into your own life in answering these questions. So I say 3, but it could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, just whatever feels natural. I might also consider having a weakness in mind. Although you shouldn't offer up too many weaknesses or any weaknesses when they're not specifically asked for, I think if you have a mild weakness, or even if it's just something you say, in passing, almost in a joking way, you could bring that in at this point just to show that you're not trying to be perfect, and that, you have a sense of perspective on yourself and you're happy to laugh at yourself. So maybe, if it was me, I would say for each of those questions, for how a family member or friend or how yourself would describe you, I would say maybe 3 or so strengths, maybe 1 weakness if you want, but not too important, and just back it up with just like an anecdote or a general background into your life and how you've shown that, or a few examples of where that's been the case. You'll see there again with the 6th question, what are your strengths and weaknesses? So they can't ask it just straight out. And again, just have the same principles apply. Just think of a few for each. Weaknesses, you need to be careful not to make it too incriminating, but then not to have an answer which is too far the other way, which is a cop-out. So in other words, one which isn't really a weakness at all. So it's a fine line. Just try and think of something which isn't too incriminating, but is still a legitimate weakness. Moving on now to the question of what do you want to change about yourself? And there's a number of different ways they could ask this. They could ask, what do you want to change about yourself? What have you recently changed about yourself? What do you think needs further improvement? And then what do you think needs improvement, again, if you got into medical or dentistry school? So a number of different ways there. I think the key with questions of improvement is that while your first inclination may be to pick a weakness, just because of the way the question's framed, you can actually take an aspect of your character which is actually, in your eyes, quite good, and still say that it needs improvement. So in other words, just because something needs improvement, it doesn't mean it has to be bad. It can still be quite reasonable, but in your mind, you want it to be better. And that's how I think I would tackle that, because if you've just given a weakness, or even if you haven't, it's still quite difficult to think of a weakness which isn't too incriminating. So just think of something which maybe is not perfect, but is still quite good about your character, and then talk about why you think it needs improvement, and then the steps you will take, or ideally are currently taking, in order to improve. Because self-improvement is one of the key things that they like to hear about often in interviews. So that's how I tackle those ones. And again, it's kind of the same thing with the bottom 2 or 3 questions there about improvements and aspects of your character that you might need to make and that you are currently with, and how they relate to a career in medicine or dentistry. So with these ones, it's the same principle, but just think about what is required if you're a doctor or a dentist. And they may be different to the ones before. It might be good to have a bit of depth in your answers and to make them a bit different in case you get asked both questions. Again, just think about why that's the case, how that applies to a career in medicine or dentistry, and if it's a question of improvement, steps you're taking to improve, and the end goal. Although really you should sort of peddle an idea of constant self-improvement, so always getting better. And the last question there about what aspect of your character might medical school improve, just think about, again, this is kind of the same thing, but you can also bring in here a bit of knowledge about, or you can demonstrate that you know a bit about what it takes to study medicine or dentistry, and a bit about the difficulties of the course and what it asks of you, and link that into aspects of your character and how they might improve. The type question there is pretty much the same as the one before, so I won't go into that one, but it's the same principles again. Particularly the second question there, so what are your interests, hobbies, can be sports, anything like that. What you need to think about in answering that is the third question on that page, is what do they say about you as a person? Because from the perspective of an interviewer, they don't mind too much about what sports you play or what hobbies you have. That doesn't really affect too much about your ability as a doctor or dentist in the future. It's more about that third question there on that page of what does it say about you, what you do. So it's that link you have to make. So in other words, if you do some team sports, you can say it shows that you enjoy working with others, you know your role, you enjoy collaborating. If it's an activity which is based in the community, like a volunteering sort of thing, you can point out the whole community well-being and social aspect of that. If you have hobbies which are more individual, if it's more kind of a private thing, you can say you like, whatever it is. If it's dealing with showing your patience or showing your love for detail, just think about whatever it is you do as a hobby or for an interest or sport. Think about what aspect of that you can link back to being a doctor, being a dentist, studying, the things that they're really interested in. So the fourth question there, what is your most valued achievement? The only thing I'd say with this one is that I'd be careful in picking something kind of academic, because they already know that you're pretty good academically. So try and show other aspects of you as a person. So if you have like a volunteering, fundraising, community achievement that you're quite proud of, I'd go for that, unless there's something kind of very impressive you have done academically, or if it's a sporting achievement, or even think outside the more traditional achievements, as it were. If you have done something in your life you're proud of, that can be an achievement. So try and think less about what looks good on the CV and more about what is actually important in life in answering that question. That kind of links in with the fifth one about community service and volunteering. Again, just think about anything. It can be a one-off thing, just fundraising, community events, volunteering. Just give a bit of a brief description of what you did. Ideally, if it would be good, and then maybe how that links into your, or what you got from that and how you enjoyed that. The question below that is very similar to the one above, but then you can bring in the whole spectrum ideally with this one about what you've done. So it can be academic and sport and volunteering and other. You can mention a few different things to show that you're quite well balanced. And again, just explain why you take pride in it, but ideally not too arrogantly if you can. Tell us about a key event in your life and how it shaped you. Again, this is probably more personal. Try and think about the big moments of your life. When you changed schools, if you moved towns or cities, if someone very close to you passed away or got sick. Think about the key events and ask yourself honestly what you think shaped you the most and say why. Why was it so important to you? Kind of linking on from that, describe some people who have been important in your life. So this can be parents, family, friends, teachers, perhaps people you don't know personally, celebrities of some sort, authors, anyone really. Just, again, it's all about having a few different answers or a few different points to each answer and describing why that is the case, why they've been important to you in this case. And the last four questions there are all about your relationship with your parents, grandparents, and I suppose family in general. They could also ask that. So just think about with your parents, genuinely what they've given you over time and at different time points in your life. Just think deeply about it as well. Has it changed? Have you become closer to one or the other? Describe the nature of it. Is it very close? Is it quite... just describe it. And then again, what has each one provided you with? That's kind of also testing a bit more deeply your appreciation of them and your understanding of what you've been given. And I guess also the opportunity to study medicine or dentistry can kind of link into that as well. It's the same with the grandparents. They can ask about when you last talked to them, how often you talk to them, what you talk about, and just your general relationship again. It's the same things about how it's changed over time, what they've given you at different points in your life, and maybe on the flip side, what you've given them, and same for your parents. So don't neglect the other angle as well. If they just ask to describe the relationship, you can give both sides from your perspective. But again, this is also a good time to throw in a few anecdotes, a bit of humour maybe, that just illustrate what you're saying and make you seem a bit more human and a bit better on an interpersonal sort of level. Now, the first four questions on this slide are all about your friends and your friendship groups. So I don't know what your friends and you discuss or what the nature of your group is like, but try and keep it quite wholesome. Filter out what maybe they don't want to hear. Just ask yourself, what sort of friends do you have? Are you very loyal? Are you, as a group, are you very loyal? Are you good fun? What is it that defines you as a group? How's it changed over time? Try and give an idea of kind of unity. If you are in a group of people with different backgrounds, then you can mention that too. They may even ask that as a separate question. So if you can casually mention that you have people of different personalities and different backgrounds, that'd be a great thing to say about your group. Think about what you discuss before the interview, because you want to filter out some of that probably and just pick some aspects of what you talk about. And also think about what you do contribute to your friendship group. So what is your role, or what do you bring to the group that other people maybe don't to quite the same degree? It's kind of a question of what is your strength, but in relation to your friendship group. So just have a think about each of those. They may ask you about your time in primary school and high school. So just describe the nature of the school in each case, your friendship group, a bit about what you remember, the transition between high school and primary school and high school might also be asked about. So just be honest again and say if you had an easy time or a harder time. I mean, they probably prefer to hear that you make friends quite easily, but you can also say that you're quite shy if you are. And just talk about how that transition was, how you found some new friends, how you fell into a group, the things that surprised you maybe if they were different schools. Just have a think back through that and then pick out the salient bits. Now the next slide, or slide and a half or so, might be pretty familiar to people who have seen my video on MMI interviews, just because they deal with themes of things like teamwork, leadership, conflict resolution, stress management, those sort of themes which are both present in panel interviews and MMI interviews. So in a panel interview there'll be more about, rather than the general qualities of a good team or a good leader, for instance, there'll be personal examples of when you've been or you've seen a good team leader or a good team or good conflict resolution, for instance, in your own personal life. So just beginning there, give an example of a time when you've been a team leader or a team member, so they could ask you the question, in an effective team. And then implied from that is that you should give an explanation of why that was the case. So this again could be from school, sport, community stuff, doesn't really matter too much. Just think about an example of when you've been a good team leader, and then maybe a time when you haven't been the best leader you could, and same for when you've been a good team member, and then maybe again not the best team member, and a good team overall and a bad team overall, and why that was the case. So go into what elements of that resulted in it being a good or a bad team. Think about the leader, think about the members, think about the communication, the end goal, all those sort of things. Just have an answer ready for that. They may ask you also, do you normally prefer being a team leader or a team member? And I think probably the best thing to say there is that you're happy enough being either. Maybe just explain, I mean, personally my answer was something about it depends on how well I understand the goal and how to get there, and also how well I know the team around me. And also if other people around me are better qualified at being a team leader or a team member. So it depends on circumstances, but just, I would say, kind of suggest you can do both pretty happily, and give the circumstances in which you might do either. Same for, do you prefer working individually or in a team? If anything, if it's phrased like that, it's more asking you to make a choice, and I would lean towards team, because part of a career in medicine or dentistry is that you will work in a team, and you want to be seen as someone who isn't too closed off from other people. You want to be seen as someone who's quite good with working with others, and a good team member in general. And just to finish off that slide, like I said, a few examples of being in a poor team, and then what leadership roles have you held? So there can be, if they ask you that specifically, you can give a few different ones from school or sport or community again, and then just be ready for the follow-up, as is the case for all of these questions of, what did you learn from that? Do you think you did well? What does that say about you as a person? All the sort of deeper stuff that they tend to follow up with. So just a few more questions along the lines of leadership and teamwork and those sort of themes. What sort of people do you find it difficult to get along with or to deal with in life, and why? Remember that in a career as a doctor or a dentist, you need to get on with everybody who comes to you. So you can't really afford to just not deal well with a certain proportion of the population. So this is a loaded question, really, but I think the best way to answer it, or at least the way I answered, which seemed to go okay, was that I said I found it difficult to get along with people who are just, without reason, seemingly very destructive or unhelpful, or just not really contributing to the greater good. I think if you give a general answer like that and qualified in that sort of way, it's probably the best way to answer that without it being too incriminating. But if you think of something better than that, then go for it, because it is a tricky question. In terms of how you deal with the situation, you can maybe have a look at stress management techniques, and maybe also conflict resolution techniques if you push it that far, and also just general stuff like keeping things in perspective, maybe having other people around you when you deal with them if possible, those sort of things. The third question there, describe a situation where you've worked with a diverse group of people, and what did you learn from that situation? So try and think back through your life for a team or a group which fits that question, and then ask yourself genuinely, what did you learn from that? And if you're struggling, maybe something to do with just the sort of the fact that often if you have a group of people with different backgrounds, the end result is greater than the sum of the parts. Just mention, collaboration and learning things from other people as well. That exploring different people's perspectives can help your own, that sort of stuff. Tell me about a time you've made a mistake, and what did you do and how did you correct it? This could be something in your personal life, whatever it is. Just always think about what might be following up the question that might follow up the initial question. So if you, in thinking of an example of a time when you've made a mistake, make sure you can discuss how you corrected it afterwards, the steps you took to improve it and correct it. And if you can't do that, then try and think of a different one. It's all about the follow-up with these questions. What can they ask you? What are they trying to get at here in terms of this being a medical interview or an interview for you being a doctor or a dentist? Give us an example of a leader you admire. This can be in the medical field or the health field or not. It can be outside. Again, the follow-up will probably be something about what do you take from their example or how they inspired you to improve yourself as a leader. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to seem too forced or too prepared if you don't have a healthcare leader you admire. But try and think of something quite genuine if possible, and maybe not too generic, not the answers that everyone gives if possible. What was the most stressful situation you faced and how did you handle it? Don't hold back too much here. It's okay if it's quite heavy. That's probably what they're after, just to show that you handled it well is the most important thing there. So in a sense, the more stressful and heavy and deep it is, the better. And once again, it's just simple, the steps you took to handle it, and whether you thought you did that well or well or badly, and how you will improve on that in future. All about self-improvement again. And the bottom question there is very similar to the one before, the third last question about someone you admire. So I guess they don't have to be a leader. We just have maybe an example for each of those. And again, describe why and what you take from them, and how they help you improve and inspire you. So has there been a time in your life when you faced significant disappointment, setbacks, or failures? And how did you deal with this? So again, don't worry if you think it's too heavy, because I think in a way, almost the heavier the better. It shows that you're happy to talk about quite private things if you are happy to. But equally, they understand that most people doing this interview are 18 or 19, so they understand that you haven't had that much life experience. So if you can't think of anything too significant, that's okay. Just give the best you've got. That won't disadvantage you too much. The much more important thing here is the question of how did you deal with it? So how do you deal with disappointment? I think for me, a good thing to say is, and what I said was that it's good to keep things in perspective. That for most people watching this video, even if you didn't get into medical or dentistry school, you're still very lucky to probably be in a great country, to be young, probably with a healthy body and a healthy mind, and then you'll have other chances in future. And then maybe by not getting in, you'll have other opportunities in a different field which you you didn't appreciate or you don't see coming. So I think just perspective is a good thing to say. You can talk about the steps you take in dealing with that more generally, things like spending more time with friends, taking up or continuing hobbies and spending more time with those, and just keeping a positive frame of mind. All those sorts of things is the more important part of that question, the question of how did you deal with it. The second question there about has there been a time when someone's been critical of you? How did you deal with it, and how do you deal with criticism in general? So again, this can be a bit incriminating if given that you're kind of recounting a time when someone's been critical of you. So you need to be careful. Again, try and take a positive spin on it in terms of how you dealt with it, and maybe say that in this modern day, people aren't often that critical. So if someone's brave enough to offer you genuine constructive criticism, I think that's the key there, the constructive bit, then in a way it's a good opportunity to take that and to improve in future. So it's kind of that appreciation or that perspective you have on life, the appreciation of things which maybe don't seem ideal at first, and then self-improvement. Those are the main kind of themes of that question that they're targeting. For the question of how do you make decisions, again, there are a whole bunch of things you can say for this, and it's good to just give a few different points in your answer for every question if you can. So I would say taking as much time as is possible to make the best decision, talking to people who have been in that situation before, talking to people who have been or who know you very well and know what's often best for you, maybe thinking about what the best and most likely and worst outcome for each different option is. Those sort of things. Just have a few different points to your answer for that one, as for all of them, really. Just a few different ideas. Can you give us an example of a time you've made a difficult decision? Again, it's about difficult times in your life, and it's kind of following up from the previous question. It's asking you to give a more practical example of how you've applied the decision-making skills you discussed in the previous question. So if you have that one as a follow-up, then go through and talk about what you've just mentioned before, about the methods you used to make a decision and how you did so in that case, or in that example, and then whether it was a good or bad outcome and how you can improve in future. That's the general structure again. How do you know when you're stressed? Again, you can just, it's always fine to admit that you get stressed. I don't know what the signs are for you, but just list them off. And then what do you do? How do you deal with stress? Again, it's important, given the high stress nature of the careers that you're probably going for, that you have a method of de-stressing. Whether it's, again, to keep things in perspective, whether it's to do hobbies, to be by yourself for a bit, whatever it is, just mention that and describe an example, perhaps, of a time you've used that. So now we move on to questions about universities and courses and just the process of medical education as a whole, and then also your motivations for becoming a doctor or a dentist. So beginning at the top there, what do you know about our university and our course? Is a pretty common question or questions to get, and it really is just a case of reading up through the brochures or the website they provide, seeing what makes their university or course a bit different from others, and it's pretty obvious to find what they take pride in and how they kind of differentiate themselves from other universities and other courses. So just read up on that, and then basically just relay it back to them, and that'll be fine. So with the university, maybe it's just the atmosphere, maybe it's you've talked to people at the university and they've told you good things, maybe something more technical about if it's got a good research base, if it's got a good clinical exposure, or if the clinical years are meant to be very good, if it gives you chances to travel, those sort of things. With the course, if it's a PBL structure, if you just like the style of the courses it goes through, again, things like travel and clinical exposure, just mention those. As for the third one of why ours over others, just maybe talk there, give a bit more perspective on your career and what you maybe hope to go into, whether it's research or as a clinician, and then suggest or give them why you think their course will help you more than others in achieving that, basically. The fourth question there about what do you know about the process of medical education and training, that is just to get an idea of whether you know how long the process is and how difficult it can be. So just give them the idea that you know that, after you graduate, there's a year of internship, maybe 2 to 3 of residency, and then 4 to 7 maybe of specializing. And even then, when you're fully graduated, there's still a lifetime of reading up and keeping up to date. So it never really ends. Just give them the idea that you know that it's a long process and that you've got exams and supervising, or you're being supervised for a lot of it, and then it can be pretty tough at times. Just get that across, and that's all I really want there. The question of what do you see as potential challenges you might face, again, it's the same kind of thing. It doesn't really require you to bring in too many personal factors. It's more just asking you, what do you see as a difficult aspects of medical training in the medical career, whether it's long hours, the work-life balance, ethical dilemmas, difficult patients, whatever it might be, unpleasant circumstances, lots of traveling with a young family, I don't know, but just think of a number of different things again, and just relay that to show that you have a perspective and an idea of that it can be difficult. The next question is probably the most kind of famous and common one. So why do you want to be a doctor or a dentist? What are your motivations? And I think here it's just a case of don't be too cliched. You can say you want to help people. I probably try and say it in a slightly different way and maybe alongside different points as well. But just think about your reasons, whether it's an interest in the sciences, the fact it's a changing career, like constantly changing, whether you like teamwork, you like being academically challenged, just mention a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of different reasons. I think that's what I did. I just said that no other career offered that combination in that way. The question of what you want to achieve in medicine or dentistry is a tricky one because obviously you're so early on in your career that it's difficult to predict where you'll go. But the interviewers do like to hear some idea of a direction, even though it's probably going to change a million times. If you have like a specialty in mind, then definitely tell them about that and explain why you're particularly interested in that. If you're not, then consider things about maybe rural health or indigenous health or working overseas, or just anything that you think could kind of define your potential career. Just show that you have some interest beyond just the idea of getting into medicine and that you're interested in the actual career part later on. So the question of what are the advantages and disadvantages of becoming a doctor or a dentist, that's kind of similar to, well, at least the advantages are similar to the why do you want to be a doctor question, but obviously this version isn't quite as personalized. So your answer doesn't have to be from your perspective. It can just be about, the similar things, the good things about being a doctor. And then equally importantly in this case is the disadvantages, and that's where where you need to show that you understand some of the realities and some of the difficulties that a medical career or a dentistry career would have. So that second part, the disadvantages part, is really just to see if you have, again, like before, just an appreciation of how difficult it can be. As for what the job actually entails, so the next question, apart from treating patients, there's potentially teaching opportunities, there's research opportunities, more mundane things. Again, they want to see that you understand that it's not all, moments of glory. So paperwork, dealing with families, dealing with all different administration, and actually knowing that really much of your time is spent away from treating patients. And as for the last two, what have you done to show how much you want to be a doctor or a dentist, and what have you done to find out whether that's the career for you? These questions both of them deal with things like work experience, volunteer work, even just talking to people who are currently studying and currently in medical and dentistry careers. So that's just showing what you've done outside of, your schoolwork. in terms of seeing whether you want to be a doctor and showing that you are the right candidate. Okay, so when did you first decide you might be interested in a career as a doctor or a dentist? It's a fairly straightforward question. You just need to describe when it was in your life. And it's just another chance to give an anecdote and to appear more human and kind of break the ice, potentially, if it's quite early on. But just talk about what happened, what influenced you, who influenced you, which is the next question, whether they were parents or doctors or teachers or friends. Just go through and be honest and describe the process that you went through in becoming interested in medicine or dentistry. With the question of whether you have a medical family or not, again, just be honest. It doesn't matter. The only thing you want to maybe avoid is giving the impression that you're doing medicine or dentistry because you have a medical family. But as long as you kind of make it clear that it's not the reason why you're going into it, if you do, that should be fine. But really, it's fine. Just be honest with that one. The question of whether you know what you want to specialize in yet, even though you probably don't have too much idea, or you may not have any idea, it's always good to give some indication to show that, once again, you're not just interested in getting into medicine as a course, but you have a long-term perspective to a career. It kind of shows you have, better motives in a way, or at least as far as the interviewers are concerned. So even if you don't know exactly, you could say maybe broadly surgery or broadly a physician or GP specialty, or broadly again research or clinical practice. Just give something other than I don't know, and you can acknowledge that it may change many times, and you appreciate that. That's probably a good thing to say to show that you have some perspective, but also give something. Don't just say I'm not sure. You need to give something. As for where you see yourself in 5-10 years' time, that's kind of a combination, that question, of both the one before about, what specialty you see yourself going into, and also your understanding of the sort of trajectory of medical education and training, which we went over before. So it's kind of a combination of that. In 5 years' time, you'll probably be ideally in medical or dentistry school. 10 years, maybe a resident or just beginning specialty training. So long as you know roughly what the different time points are and where you hope to be, that's fine. And same for 20 years' time and so forth. How would you react if you didn't get into the course? Emphasize that you'd be sad and disappointed, but also keep it in the perspective of still being very fortunate to have the opportunity and the chance to retry again in following years. And also, again, that you can talk about perhaps other paths you could go down in the meantime. So whether they're medical science or nursing or physio, you can talk about that. And if you are very keen to get in future, then always stress that you will look to come back and try again. The question of what do you know about our course or this course is pretty similar to the previous question of why our course over other universities' courses. Except maybe you don't need to sell it quite as much here, and it's more just about the facts of their course. So get a good understanding of what a typical week in first year might be like, and then second, third, fourth, fifth, maybe sixth or seventh. Just have a rough idea of how it progresses, how it will probably begin quite theory-based and move to become more clinical over time. Know about any travel opportunities or exchange or clinical placements, and just have an understanding of how the course structure is and how the course works. The second last question there is more subjective. So what do you think the purpose of a medical course should be? I would say something about maybe the acquisition of knowledge and also skills, clinical skills, and also just professionalism, and ultimately really just to prepare students for internship, which is really the next step. But have a think about that and really work out what you think the purpose of the course should be, because you can go beyond what I just said there and make it much more detailed and an overall better answer. And that sort of follows into the final question there of what do you hope to gain from the course apart from the degree and the knowledge itself. So your answer could include things like gaining new friendship, meeting people from different backgrounds, maybe travel opportunities or meeting people from within the industry and forming connections. Just have a think about that one and jot a few things down. The question of what would you do if you didn't get into the course is quite similar to the one before about how would you react if you didn't get into the course. But this is probably a bit more pragmatic. It's more asking you what would you actually do if you didn't get in. So whether it's taking a gap year or doing another course, just be honest with them. But ideally try and make it sound as though your fallback is still trying to push you back towards a career in medicine or dentistry eventually. Even if it's just volunteer work on your gap year or the fact your fallback course is similar to medicine, try and have sort of a perspective on getting back towards applying for medicine in the future, or at least make it seem that way. As for the question of why not other similar careers like medical science, physiotherapy or nursing, just be honest as to why you prefer medicine or dentistry over those ones, one by one obviously, so your reasons for each one should be different. And there may be a greater level of scientific knowledge or understanding, or more patient care time, more diagnostic work. Just have a think one by one why you prefer medicine or dentistry over each of those three. Again, without mentioning money or prestige or anything like that. With the questions of the qualities of a good and bad doctor, I won't go into it. They're pretty easy. All I'll say is that do think of 4 or 5 at least beforehand, because it's the sort of question where it seems easy, but when you're on the spot, it can be a bit tricky. So give them a good thought. And the other thing is, don't just make the bad qualities opposites of the good. Try and think of a few different ones, so that it's not just polar opposites. And the rest of that slide is really just about working in rural areas as a doctor or dentist. So really for this, you want to just give off a positive attitude, and you want to have some idea of the challenges facing both individual doctors in the country as well as just the general issue of rural healthcare in Australia. But try and get informed, try and be positive towards it, and suggest that you're interested whenever that topic comes up. On to the final slide now, and the top point there is just about a few of the current issues which are up for debate and are often the basis of ethical dilemmas. So I've got abortion, euthanasia, alternative medicine, and stem cell research. And for each of those, you don't need to be an expert by any means, but I would just read up a little bit about some of the background information, the different positions people can take, and maybe form an opinion of your own that you can express if you're asked for it. But if you do get asked for it, try and also make the argument for the other side. So in other words, not the side that you're making, to show that you understand why it's a dilemma and you can sort of appreciate both sides, just to show that you can be impartial if you need to be, even though you hold your own beliefs. But just have a quick read up on each of those. The second dot point there is also about current issues. So you might get asked about current issues, or indeed the biggest issue currently facing Australian healthcare. And that's subjective and it's up to you, but just it's one of the ones which you really need to have a think about beforehand, rather than just thinking on the spot. So it could be something as broad as Indigenous healthcare or rural healthcare, or something more specific, but as long as you know what you're talking about and you can justify it, that'll be fine. And just to finish off, a couple of unusual questions that they can give you. Famously, some people have gotten questions about, if you're a type of animal or biscuit or bread, what would it be and why? Very difficult to prepare for that, but just so you know, they can throw the odd one at you, and it's good to be at least prepared that it may come, even if you have no idea what it is. And finally, tell us about a book you've read, most recently often, and with this it's more about the follow-up question of what did you learn from that, or maybe how does that relate to a medical career. So just have a think about a few recent books you've read and pick one which seems quite relevant to either a medical career, or at least something you can, or at least pick a book which you took something away from. And finally, they might conclude by asking, do you have any questions for us? It's often good to ask them something if you can, but if you can't, it's probably no big deal. So it's just a genuine chance to ask any questions you may have, and then conclude the interview. And that's it for this presentation. Like I said at the beginning, that's not an exhaustive list of questions. But certainly in my experience doing Australian panel interviews, if you go through each of those and you have a good answer for each, it should cover you for the majority of questions. But keep looking around, keep looking for more questions, and if you need any, like I said at the start, if you need any notes or resources, or if you want any tutoring, then get in touch via that address.